Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
SETI's results for 2018 proves our effectiveness as a development partner, placing people at the center of our work and leveraging partnerships and cooperation to transform policy imperatives into action. With an eye on the rapidly changing global context, SETI is innovating to constructively address the emerging challenges and opportunities for the region. As part of our competitiveness program, SETI is designing precise tools to assess assets and capabilities in the productive sector to determine paths towards higher value goods and services. As our flagship program for partnerships, the Americas Competitiveness Exchange on Innovation and Entrepreneurship, the OAS, will continue to leverage good practices and the power of networks to increase trade and investment in the region.
For us, the role of the OAS is very important, connecting countries, connecting governments and private sector, and letting us know what other countries are doing it and how we can replicate that in our countries to enhance development.
For me, who has come here to look at how can we develop our own ecosystem, our own innovation hubs, our own accelerators, I think seeing this, touching, feeling, seeing the transformation, seeing how quickly you've made it happen, is a testament to what is possible. So I believe all of us leave here stronger than ever.
The Working Group of Experts on Subnational Competitiveness, the GTEX, is our gateway program to promote local economic competitiveness policies alongside municipal and state-level governments, together with the private sector and academia.
Este tipo de reuniones te sirven para darte cuenta de todo lo que se está viviendo en América Latina sobre los temas de competitividad. Y hoy justamente en este sector estamos viendo sobre todo los temas de innovación tecnológica, pues que si hablamos de competitividad tenemos que hablar de tecnología. Y me está ayudando mucho para ver el panorama de ver lo que están haciendo otras ciudades y lo que podemos llegar a aplicar también nosotros en México.
The Hub on the Transfer and Commercialization of Technology is connecting and strengthening national innovation ecosystems in the region. Each edition of the Hub trains budding technology
more than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
SETI's results for 2018 proves our effectiveness as a development partner, placing people at the center of our work and leveraging partnerships and cooperation to transform policy imperatives into action. With an eye on the rapidly changing global context, SETI is innovating to constructively address the emerging challenges and opportunities for the region. As part of our competitiveness program, SETI is designing precise tools to assess assets and capabilities in the productive sector to determine paths towards higher value goods and services.
Of the Americas and extend a cordial welcome to this meeting of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development. These hugs that we were able to extend to each other before we began, so that we must continue on a topic that is of the utmost importance now. I would like to thank Minister Claudia Ruiz, Minister Curtis King, and to the guest panelists Andrea Garcia, Cynthia Galame, Fiona Phillips, Mayor, and Sylvia Martinez. Thank you to each and every one of you for accepting our invitation to share your experiences and join in our deliberations today on the theme towards the construction of a new hemispheric educational pact in context of change, post-pandemic educational recovery and repair. Cordial greetings as well to the Executive Secretary for Integral Development, Ms. Kim Osborne. She has indicated that we have the required quorum to begin our work. I would like to ask you, Madam Executive Secretary, to read out the list of delegations present in alphabetical order, and I also ask the Secretariat to take note of the delegations arriving in the room or connecting virtually to the meeting.
Bolivia, Canada, Chile, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, Panama, Paraguay.
Thank you. With the quorum in order, we will proceed to the topics of the meeting. I now submit to the consideration of the members of this council the draft agenda document CDOD 123/22. If there are no objections, the draft agenda is approved. Approved. Colleagues and special guests, we have all witnessed the health crisis caused by COVID-19 and what happened to the massive closure of educational centers. Faced with this, the ministries of education have focused their work on generating a framework of action to ensure continuity of education at the different levels of the educational system, promoting assistance for those most affected by the circumstances. Policymakers and decision makers in the member states of the OAS have determined that rather than seeking a return to business as usual, this is perhaps the time to imagine a new and better future for education systems globally. Systems that better serve students and societies. Systems that are resilient and can respond to rapid change. Systems that harness new knowledge about effective learning and new technologies for digital learning that enable access to affordable, high-quality education for all people. Education that provides skills to thrive in the economy of the future and become informed and engaged citizens. To that end, we see promising possibilities through innovative solutions driven by digital learning, and it has been suggested that we may even be well positioned to take steps toward a thoughtful overhaul of how we learn throughout our lives to achieve quality and equitable education across the globe. Thus, one of the priorities for the region has been to develop resilient systems for education to manage disruptions of different types, such as the one caused by COVID-19 or future disruptions. In 2021, the Secretariats of Education International and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development proposed a set of principles for effective and equitable educational recovery, in which they draw lessons learned from the pandemic, encourage collaboration among education authorities, and compile country experiences that can contribute to educational recovery to achieve higher levels of quality and equity. Against this backdrop, during this meeting, our guests will share information on the challenges and opportunities that affect the region in terms of educational continuity, with a special focus on vulnerable populations, and based on the actions and decisions taken by their governments to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic. They will also provide us with information on best practices and specific programs, as well as collaboration on 3 topics: reactivation of the post-pandemic education sector, safe return to in-person classes, and the digital education agenda. To learn in greater detail about the main challenges and opportunities that the construction of educational pacts presents in terms of surmounting fragmentation, rupture, and exclusion, as well as to share experiences on the formulation and implementation of more inclusive and accessible responses that are flexible, effective, and contextualized, we are joined by Claudia Ruiz Casasola de Estrada, Minister of Education of Guatemala, Mr. Curtis King, Minister of Education of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, whom I thank once again for their participation in this meeting. It is with great pleasure that I now offer the floor to Claudia Ruiz Casasola de Estrada, Minister of Education of Guatemala. Madam Minister, you have the floor for your presentation. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Permanent Representative of Panama. Warm greetings to the permanent representative of Guatemala and the mission. As Minister of Education, I am honored to take part in such an important political forum. In order to make the most of the time, I am going to describe the elements included in education to guarantee continuity of education policy. We are just 2 months out from our inauguration, and as part of the government's general policy, we have a social development pillar well established in our sector plan. The sector plan right now is being enhanced through the Global Alliance for Education, which we joined at the end of last year. It's important to note that when the emergency came about, we created a technical working group in the different departments, and we also had municipal working groups to take a comprehensive approach to our response to the pandemic. This was comprised of representatives of the education community, civil society, and the government. We had clusters of education. There are more than 100 members at this time. We also have local education groups who will be cooperating so that we can be accredited by the Global Alliance for Education, and so they can begin in the technical working group for response or emergency responses. We have established strategic public-private partnerships to determine priorities in terms of emergency responses, and we are seeking cooperation agreements specifically to organize different actors in the education community. We have been working to professionalize faculty through programs and a special emergency response system, and we're providing training, working specifically on a plan that will provide a response and devise an emerging curriculum for 2023. There are different social actors involved. We have our advocates for development. We are looking to facilitate support and financing from the Ministry of Education. We want guarantors to ensure results and impacts in actions, support for the education process, and what's more important, we have approximately 30,000 parent and family organizations that are supporting the process of school food programs by purchasing inputs for biosafety, water, and sanitation. We want the parents to manage these resources, and this makes it much easier for us to ensure that this food support got to the households that needed it. In terms of the experiences and lessons learned, we're seeing leadership in the education communities. We have our faculty working with parent organizations. We are working on implementation of a comprehensive plan for the prevention, response, and recovery from COVID-19 in 2020-2021. We had coverage in the Mayan languages for learning at home. Guatemala has 25 official languages, so we implemented different guides and learning modules with cultural and linguistic competencies, as we were able to provide money and funds to cover 2.6 million families. We have this emergency curriculum. We worked with the consortium of universities. This is for 2020-2023 protocols for return to the classroom. that are culturally and linguistically relevant. Last year, we assessed the learning that students had achieved, and we also implemented a strategy to improve learning that is also culturally and linguistically relevant. We have several thousand volunteers who are becoming certified as reading and mathematics tutors to reinforce students' learning, particularly from 1st through 4th grade. We have 4,000 education centers that are now fully equipped with water and sanitation. What are the elements that stand out in the implementation of these agreements? For example, we have field schools for school food programs. Our parent organizations have been enhanced, especially as far as transparency is concerned. We have school health insurance. This has been very important in the context of the pandemic to attend to the needs of our students. We are moving very quickly forward in technological innovation. We are also providing education that is flexible for those who dropped out during the pandemic. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to the following presentations. Thank you very much, Madam Minister, for taking part in this meeting. I am sure that we will continue to count on your experience and do the inputs for the comprehensive nature of education, including health, as far as it impacts the education system. I would also like to thank the delegation of Guatemala and our Vice Chair, the Ambassador, for everything they did to make sure that you were able to take part. I now have the honor of giving the floor to His Excellency Curtis King, Minister of Education of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Mr. Minister, you have the floor.
Minister, could you please request the floor? Now you have to turn on your camera and your microphone.
Good. Thank you very much, and good morning once again. Her Excellency Maria Rockbot, Permanent Representative of Panama and Chair of the CIDI, Permanent Representatives and Alternates, Permanent Observers, Executive Secretary Kim Osborne, and staff of the General Secretariat. Good morning. It is indeed a pleasure for us here in St. Vincent and Grenadines to participate in this important forum. I recognize the limitation of time, so I go right into the presentation. I must say, though, at the onset that our response is placed within the context of us facing not just a pandemic, but at the height of the pandemic, we also experienced an explosive eruption of our La Soufrière volcano, which resulted in just under 1/5 of our population having to be transferred from their homes, evacuated from their homes, and lived in shelters for quite a long period of time. And most of these shelters were in fact schools. Secondly, our response to the COVID situation has been placed within the context of a regional response. That is to say, we have been working within the OAS, our regional network, to coordinate a response to the pandemic. So my presentation focused briefly on the peculiar circumstances here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and our efforts. But I'm saying within this presentation, we must also see the effort to make a coordinated and regional response. Now, as a first response, what we did here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we established teams of educators to produce lessons for students from kindergarten to grade 6 at the primary level and the forms 1 to 5 at the secondary level. And these were all intended to ensure that there was continuity of learning, given the fact that schooling was severely disrupted and the schools were all closed. Now, these lessons were streamed live via television and digital media, such as Facebook, and they were done during scheduled times in the week from the period April to June 2020. We produced some 105 learning videos, and these videos were done to support student learning, as I'm saying, while they were out of schools. These learning videos covered language arts, literature, science, math, French, Spanish, health, and family life education. Additionally, we did learning packages comprising worksheets, workbooks, and other learning materials. And these were distributed among schools for those students who had no access to internet and to devices. We also used the opportunity to enhance the wide range of materials that the svgedu.org website was producing at the time, so that students had other access to information. After exploring various online platforms to facilitate classes, the MS Teams for Education was selected as the most suitable at the time to support online learning for students from kindergarten to Form 5. Students from all the primary schools and 15 of our 28 secondary schools, they use the Microsoft Teams, while the other secondary schools, they utilize the Google Suite and also Moodle platforms. And of course, schools also use WhatsApp and Edmodo also to stay in contact with their students. Alongside this, we provided training for our teachers to improve their online delivery and engagement with students. Quickly, these included training in extending competencies in navigating the Microsoft Teams e-learning platform, Google Suite for Education, Moodle platforms to provide instructions for students. And we had some 897 teachers exposed to such training. Online assessment and blended learning strategies, we exposed 80 teachers to those training sessions. And we also had training sessions in inquiry-based approaches to teaching science. 114 teachers participated there. And finally, we also provided training in gamification, creating digital games, and other instruction. Now, very importantly, we recognize that there was a deficit with regards to devices among students and teachers. So, working with our partners, the government provided just under 28,000 tablets or devices for all the students from grade 1 in the primary schools, all the students in the secondary schools, as well as all the teachers in both the primary and secondary schools. And we went further and provided each student at our lone community college with devices to allow them to access learning or the instruction during this difficult period. And in terms of another initiative taken, walking through the OAS network, we established 3 very important panels. These were one, a panel to create resources to mitigate against future disruptions. And there were also, well, let me put it this way. These panels were the Content Development Committee, the Monitoring Committee, and the Guidelines Protocols Committee. In the interest of time, I won't go into detail. Generally, we receive a lot of support from our social actors, our key stakeholders, if you like. We are speaking here about the Parent Teachers Association, the Principals Associations, the teachers, and the Teachers Union. Although it is also correct to say that at times the Teachers Union was not always consistent with their support. But nevertheless, we had general cooperation and an appreciation for the difficulties we experienced. In terms of the lessons and experiences, the pandemic exposed more sharply some of the major weaknesses in our education system. Yes, we recognize that there were weaknesses in our education system before the pandemic, as well as before the volcanic eruption. But during the pandemic, and having to coin a response and execute that response, what we did recognize is that some of these weaknesses within the system showed up greater than they might have done in the past, so that we have to address these. I will also say that, importantly, despite a policy initiative that we took over a decade ago to integrate ICT in the teaching learning process, and we did so with the provision of devices and training for, well, devices to our students and teachers, as well as training to our teachers. What we recognize coming out of this experience is that the online mode of instruction is not a great substitute for face-to-face instruction. In particular, the system was weak in terms of the content. Content was, in a lot of instances, not relevant or not appropriate to our circumstances. And significantly, quite a number of our students engaged in alternative activities, using these devices for alternative activities that were not always complementary to the school programs that were being executed. Additionally, though, we recognize that despite the weaknesses, there was the need for us to have continuity of learning. And very importantly, our guiding philosophy of no child should be left behind, we had to ensure that we made strategic interventions to ensure that students at a disadvantage were provided with the means to gain access to the online instruction that were available. I speak of some students who were without electricity, some students who were without devices, and we had to ensure that we provide free electricity. We had to provide devices for those students so that the issue of exclusion would not be a major fallout of the pandemic. Of course, we were not perfect, but we feel satisfied that we have done quite a great deal to ensure that we limit the impact of the exclusion. Now, quickly, in terms of the social deficit, we do recognize that students from disadvantaged homes, now that they had no face-to-face instruction, other issues relative to food had to be provided, and we work with other social actors to ensure that those students receive food packages, and they receive them in their different locations. Very importantly, we also provided psychosocial support for many of our students, and very importantly, teachers and parents and guardians also, especially during the time when several of these students, parents, guardians were at shelters because of the volcanic eruption. In conclusion, what we have come to recognize is that we cannot return to what has been said or described as normal operation with regards to how we deliver our education services. It is clear that the pandemic has provided us with an opportunity to experience, execute, if you like, a paradigm shift in our education delivery. And already walking through our OAS network, we have already started to discuss this very important task. How are we going to make the necessary adjustment in the education system to make it more relevant to our times, and very importantly, to make it more resilient, so that when we have difficulties like these, the system will experience some sustainability. And I leave it at this stage, and I look forward to the continued discussions.
Muchísimas gracias, Ministro King, por su presentación.
Thank you very much, Minister King, for your presentation and for sharing your views. And it's terrible that in addition to the pandemic, you suffered the natural disaster, the volcanic eruption, which aggravated the situation and which provided impact on health, food security, and social well-being. And thank you for sharing the weaknesses that you encountered as you addressed the preparation of educational materials and the teaching and training of teachers, which is an issue we're going to continue discussing. I'd like to thank the delegation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, particularly Ambassador Juan Digis, the colleague and special colleague, for the effort she made to ensure that the minister could participate this morning. Now we will begin the technical panel with the participation of Mrs. Cynthia Game, Vice Minister of Education of Ecuador, Andrea Garcia, Secretary of Cooperation and Priority Actions, Educational Cooperation and Priority Actions, the Ministry of Education of Argentina, by Mrs. Fiona Philip Mayer, Director of Education of the Ministry of Education of St. Lucia, and Mrs. Silvia Martinez, Head of the General Office of Cooperation and International Affairs in the Ministry of Education of Peru. The moderator of this outstanding panel that we have this morning will be our Executive Secretary, Mrs. Kim Osborne, the Executive Secretary for Integral Development of the OAS, and I would like to call on her.
To continue our discussion on these very important topics, we'll now be joined by a panel of experts who are in the middle of this fight on education continuity. And I am pleased to welcome all of them to the floor. I'm not sure whether we can have all of them on the panel at the same time, DCMM, or whether it will be one by one. But to begin, I would like to offer the floor to Andrea Garcia, Secretary of Education, Cooperation and Priority Actions from the Ministry of Education of Argentina. In terms of the format, each panelist will have 5 minutes to present, and then we will go into just a follow-up question on what may have been discussed. So I now offer the floor to Secretary Garcia.
Compartir con todos ustedes y participar en esta reunión ordinaria del Consejo Interamericano.
It is a pleasure to be with all of you and participate at this meeting. I would like to extend to you the commitment and the greetings of the Minister of Education of Argentina, Jaime Parsic, in his capacity as chairman of the Inter-American Committee on Education, and express my appreciation to Kim Osborne, Executive Secretary for Integral Development, and Jesus Tucumán, the Director of Human Development and Employment, for inviting me to this space. I would also like to extend greetings to the authorities of the different ministries of education in all of the Americas, as well as the ambassadors and members of the permanent missions of the countries to the OAS, and a particular greeting to Carlos Raimundi, the ambassador of the Argentine Republic to the OAS. The crisis we are encountering worldwide as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic has had and continues to have a strong impact on the lives of people in the economies of the countries and, of course, on the learning of the students in our countries, the region, and worldwide at the many different levels and modalities of education. In March of 2020, up to date, there has been a change in all the learning processes of our students. Although the educational system responded to the situation by quickly implementing different mechanisms in order to respond to the need to provide continued education, we are still having to deal with major changes in the learning process, particularly those pertaining to the practice of teaching. In such a case, one of the fundamental tasks, therefore, is to rethink the future by understanding the present and its complexity, to bring about change to the injustice and inequality that the pandemic crudely showed us, and to create for the future a horizon that will bring to our countries good analysis and planning. The risk is that this state of exception caused by the pandemic could become the grounds for creating greater inequalities as a result of the pandemic. Therefore, we as a state institution have to highlight the potential the public has and the state has that we need to provide responsible education. Solidarity in this new concept must challenge the logic of winning always, which had been considered a problem before, but it has become necessary to carry forward the battle against the disease. We now need to rethink this new way of thinking and the role and scope of a new type of state. We need to allow our states to be able to produce and care for what is common to everyone, establishing and reestablishing equality and solidarity, as Minister Pasic said in the opening section of this meeting. The challenges we face today involve repairing the socioeconomic damages caused by the pandemic, the rebuilding of our educational systems by providing greater investment in order to make it fair and more equitable, and by implementing actions that bring together all the actors that make up the educational community. If you allow me, I'd like to describe now the policies that the government of the Republic of Argentina, with our Minister Jaime Parsi, are implementing in order to ensure the full presence of all students in Argentina. An agreement we have reached with all 24 jurisdictions and the national state, so as to bring the school cycle to 190 days of school. In the last few weeks, we announced the initiative taken by the national government to add one more day of class time to Argentines' primary education so that no student has less than 25 hours of class a week. That means 18 billion pesos invested and 32 more days of classroom that would be added to the 190 days agreed to with all the various jurisdictions in order to repair and recover the losses and the work, the learning that the students missed and were not able to complete. We have made an investment by purchasing more than 8 million books so that all primary school students receive a math book, a language book, or learning a language book in order to recover the learning they lost during the pandemic. We have implemented a fellowship, a scholarship plan for children 16 to 24 years of age, which amounts to 2,037,000 youth who on a monthly basis will receive this support in Argentina so that they can complete high school and begin a university. The government has also implemented 36,000 Manuel Belgrano scholarships for students that choose careers that are strategic for our national development. It has been difficult to achieve this in the region and in Argentina. Right now, for instance, we are distributing 600,000 devices, and we've created a tender for another 1.5 million devices so that all high school students, first and second year of high school, can have electronic devices to be able to study. We're also working on bringing the families closer to the schools. More than 18,000 cooperators receive financing from the national state so that they can help to strengthen the public education system. We understand that it's necessary to meet in person again, and we understand that connectivity increases the amount of time one has, hours, and knowledge. The hemispheric changes that are taking place at the Inter-American Commission on Education have been focusing on two major themes: to focus on this development of resilient educational systems and on developing on an intersectoral agenda that includes both work and health. That's the path we have chosen, and those are the policies we are working on. Given the critical change created by the pandemic, any agreement we can reach will represent an opportunity for dialogue to find new solutions to the new problems and that help to strengthen our educational system. I hope this meeting will allow us to identify the opportunities that exist for education cooperation in the area of education, and to make it clear that all countries that are members of this organization want to ensure universal education to boys, girls, youth, and universal access to educational system, promote retaining them and graduation by improving the curriculum at all educational levels. We want to coordinate the educational agenda with the Caribbean and Latin American agendas in science, technology, and innovation for social inclusion under the principles of open science. And finally, we want to contribute to strengthening democratic institutions through our educational systems by strengthening the process of national sovereignty, regional integration, because we maintain that no external indebtedness should weaken the financing of the educational system, which would lead to greater gaps and social inequality. If we work together, we can accomplish this. Thank you.
Particularly take note of your, sorry, I take note of the pillars of your recovery process, that of equity, solidarity, equality, and fairness in the system. I think this is something that the pandemic has exposed rightfully within the context of our education system, and it's interesting that Argentina is taking particular steps to address this issue. And so we continue now with a presentation from Ms. Cynthia Game, Deputy Minister of Education from the Ministry of Education of Ecuador. Welcome, Madam Game, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning to the authorities representing the different countries, ministries, and organizations gathered here today. I also would like to extend to you a warm greeting from the Minister of Education of Ecuador, Maria Praus Perez, who's Vice President of the Inter-American Council on Education. As Vice Minister of Education, I find it very important to discuss the challenges and we encounter. The reparation of the post-pandemic, the educational system post-pandemic in Ecuador meant that we started to investigate and look for and find what were the 5 challenges or areas where we had to begin operating during the first year of this government. First, we had to begin by recovering lost learning, the digital gap, the training of teachers, and the areas where people learn. Those were areas we considered priority from the very beginning of this administration in May of 2021. These challenges also created opportunities. In the area of recovering lost learning, we focused on the skills that are necessary for the new world. Thus, today we have a curriculum that focuses 4 skill areas: communication, mathematics, social-emotional skills, and digital competence. Technology is here to stay, and it is now an educational resource. But there are also problems of connectivity and the lack of digital devices. That has led us to think of how we can change the curriculum, where we could apply the technologies of learning and IT. In this new context, a teacher has to have more training in order to be able to teach as an inquiring teacher, being creative and working in innovative environments that include technology and correct use of IT. Another important thing is that we have to change the schools. We have to abandon the traditional model of where everybody sits in a row and looks forward. Maybe the teacher should sit higher in a podium instead of having this teacher be in a podium looking down at everybody. The pandemic taught us that schools are not only a classroom. In Ecuador, we were able to apply active methodologies and work methodologies in the educational discipline. Once the emergency and lockdown was over, public planning of education has to now go beyond just recovering what was learned. We now need to look towards educational innovation. Look at the classroom with different eyes, learning how we can make literacy, technological literacy available and close the digital gap. It's also necessary to assess the curricula and give priority to key skills and incorporate a part of learning that we've forgotten, which is the socio-emotional aspect of learning. The pandemic actually created many challenges for us in the educational field, and it made us realize we need to have teachers who had technological skills and connectivity. We had to train teachers, we had to have comprehensive health, we had to prevent psychosocial risks, and we had to avoid violating rights. In November 2021, the classrooms began in presence. In February 2022, all classrooms are in person. And through a strategy developed by the Ministry of Education called Sponsor a School, which coordinates between the state and civil society, businesses and civil society organizations. And through that cooperation, we're able to provide continuity to education and open schools of the coastal system, which will start operating on the 6th of May. These are comprehensive strategies for ensuring education through digital means, web platforms, and other means of mass communication using what we call teleeducation, which was in an emergency situation, but we're seeing from a different view today. We also have to help protect the educational community, provide emotional prevention and protection, not just for the students, but for the teachers as well and their families. We need to coordinate with the educational centers for those teachers who want to continue teaching and have to learn how to communicate with the families through providing guidelines, protocols, and interventions. These strategies now allow us to develop different strategies to strengthen the educational process and have a comprehensive vision, considering that learning and emotional well-being of the students have to be seen as one. That's why if we look at the comprehensive training of our students, the Ministry of Education will be able to implement actions to develop skills in the students, skills that focus in participation, teamwork, and cooperation. For instance, we have student team programs, interactive actions in the schools, project fairs, where include digital technology. We have a space called Virtual World, which is a strategy that encourages the safe use of the internet through open digital resources. Although all of these programs are initiatives of the Ministry of Education, the activities take place in cooperation with civil society organizations or international cooperation agencies, as well as public entities within the state.
Ecuador's focus on providing psychosocial support, the recognition that education and learning goes beyond the classroom, the need to protect students, the teachers, and their families. I think sometimes that is lost in the discourse on education. So much of the focus is on technology and bridging the digital divide, but the students, the teachers, the emotional aspects of learning also needs to be taken care of, and we commend you for special efforts in that regard. To continue, I'd like to invite Fiona Philip Meyer, Chief Education Officer of the Ministry of Education of St. Lucia. Ms. Meyer, you have the floor.
Dr. Philip Meyer, could you please refresh your browser and request the file again? Doctor, can you hear me?
I'm hoping that everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Even as the camera is coming on, permit me to recognize ambassadors and delegates who are on the call with us. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you. I think this is a little better at the moment. In the capacity of Chief Education Officer, I have the pleasure to present greetings from our Honorable Minister of Education in the person of Honorable Sean Edward, and our Parliamentary Secretary responsible for education in St. Lucia, Dr. Pauline Antoine Prosper. As we run through the various slides that we've presented to you, we will do the situation analysis in St. Lucia at the moment. We will speak to some of the key components, and we will also look at the development of our education sector continuity plan for St. Lucia, identifying some of the main risk for COVID-19 transmission in schools, and a very important element for us, living safely with COVID as a way forward for the education sector. So could we quickly move to the slide on the impact of COVID on face-to-face learning on the educational sector. This slide gives you an overview as to what has happened within our education sector as of 2022, just so that you know where the transition has been within the St. Lucia context, with our school-age children being about 12% of our total transmission and COVID-19 positives around the island. Our secondary school students would have been at about 4.7%. We have some of our lowest transmissions in our infant students at the age between 5 to 7%. So all in all, we have hovered around at 12% throughout this period. Our next slide will just give you a quick visual of the epi curve, which highlights the school closure dates that we've had to endure, unfortunately, during this period of time, where you would see the closure of school significant periods at Christmas, after the summer, our schools remained closed. We did distributed learning, which involved presentation of the pages to our students and online learning using multimedia to support us. And Honorable King of St. Vincent spoke to the videos. Similarly, St. Lucia was in a very similar situation, both audio, videos, as well as the presentation of packages. Is likewise for us, it was a situation whereby some of our students did not have the devices, as well as some did not have access to instant internet, and so that created many issues for us. So you see the various waves in this component. As we move on to the next slide, we speak to strong collaboration with the Ministry of Health, Education. In my capacity as Chief Education Officer, it was a constant engagement with the Chief Medical Officer to ensure that we were working at having a consistent approach to education. So we did reviews of the school physical plant, coordinated policies and protocols. Similarly, coordination between the schools and the various health regions, our health centers, regular monitoring, updating, contact tracing being a very big one that was used to help guide our protocols. And we tried our best to look at the impact of school closure and looking at the transmission risk. And we were told over and over that we had very little transmission within our schools, but a lot of it stemmed from the communities and the homes. As we move on to our next slide, we just want to give you a brief overview of what our education sector continuity plan speaks to. And there was a lot of briefing on COVID-19. May we next slide, please? Our various roles and responsibilities, general operations within the education sector. We spoke to safely returning to school. Kindly go on to the next slide, please. And very importantly, the continuation of teaching and learning. Our health and safety officers worked at various scenarios for transmission, how to effectively manage those to make sure that we had no secondary transmission happening within our schools. We did have some cases, but those were managed. At this juncture, let me speak to our use of the Docs. St. Vincent used Microsoft Teams, but we did Google Docs island-wide to present to our students. The social, the mental well-being of teachers came for high priority. We continue to the training of our teachers. We look at the main risk for our schools. And that's our next slide, please. Our main risk were issues of the large assemblies, social activities, our transportation system in St. Lucia, whereby many of our students come to school on the various public buses. How were we to manage that? Children of various households with positive cases, where some of our parents still insisted they send their children to school. And so we had to deal with that. Symptomatic students coming to the classes. And unfortunately, some of our adults, our teachers, support staff, administrators, who engaged in private social activity, and that then impacted a school. So there was really big focus to speak to total compliance to public measures to ensure that our students were not at risk. As we move on to one of our last slides, we look at the way forward for the education sector. And our colleagues mentioned nutrition. Nutrition was also a very big thing for us as we look at sustainable, safe reopening. Now that we reopened, in fact, yesterday we reopened, Monday the 25th. And so we're hoping to have staying face-to-face in the third term. We're looking at issues of our furniture, ensuring that we have single desk, looking still at alternate days. We have about 5 schools with very large school populations, between 700 and 1,000 children. And so these students are on alternate days, meaning they come in one day, one day in, one day out. But we're praying and hoping that we can have our students come in sustained face-to-face every day. So the continued public health measures are being enforced, and we continue to work with the Ministry of Health to look at, as I spoke before, the nutritional well-being of our students, the gaps for us of students' educational attainment, and equity for those who are marginalized, more vulnerable in terms of access and sustained access to education, which is going to help them move forward. At this juncture, let me thank you on behalf of our Ministry of Education in St. Lucia for the opportunity to speak with you as to our situation within country, as well as to extend warm greetings from our Minister of Education, as well as our Parliamentary Secretary in our department. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Philip Meyer, for that presentation on St. Lucia. I think what we saw a very holistic approach, balancing the health and safety issues as well as the education continuity issues. And in going forward, it'll be interesting to hear a little bit more about that balance, how you were able to maintain that balance as you got most, if not all, of your students back into the classroom. And finally, we are joined by Sylvia Martinez, Head of the Office of Cooperation and International Affairs of the Ministry of Education of Peru. Ms. Martinez, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Madam Martinez, if you would please request the floor. Good morning. First, I wanted to thank the OAS for the invitation, Kim Osborne as well. I would like to extend my thanks to the delegations of all the countries present. I extend greetings on behalf of our Minister of Education, Mr. Laurencio Cerda. I have a three-part presentation. First, the current status of COVID-19 as of starting in March 2020, how we were impacted, as well as the progress that we've been making this year to return to in-person education. If we look at measurements of educational quality, and we go back to 2019, in Peru, those indicators were climbing in terms of writing and mathematics. We also saw better achievements for students learning in original native languages, and there were more than 40 in Peru. When COVID-19 hit, we went into lockdown. 3 measures were taken primarily. The first was multi-sector in nature. We worked with international cooperation support, the Alliance for Education. There's a coalition, is comprised of public and private institutions nationwide. The idea was to promote not the return to the classroom, but to have educational materials and have the Ministry of Education get involved in each of the needs of the different grades. Then we launched a strategy, Learn at Home, where we used digital, radio, and television media. This was supported through a distribution of tablets throughout Peru. It was a differentiated approach based on the region. We were engaged in that process throughout 2020. At the start of 2021, in rural areas, the first schools started to return to the classroom. We were always sticking to biosafety standards to safeguard the students' health. Out in the countryside, we were able to see some differences as far as infrastructure is concerned. Some of the social distinctions became more noteworthy. In large cities, students had connectivity or access to media and internet, while those who are in more remote areas and rural areas who speak native languages lacked access to connectivity and materials. So we did see a major difference there. In terms of returning to the classroom, we found other places where Peru is lagging behind, and that was particularly in educational infrastructure. I shared a presentation. I'm wondering if we can see that up on the screen. Yes. This is a presentation to share some of the progress that we've been made. We've had 3 COVID-19 waves in Peru. The first led to complete closure of schools. In the second, there was a certain return to the classroom. This year, Peru has begun widespread return to the classroom, beginning in the lockdown started in March 2020, and I will show you how far we've come since then. Next slide, please. Our target is to have all 8 million children and adolescents return to the classroom in a safe, flexible, and decentralized way. These are children and teachers in what we call alternative primary education and primary education. The first group includes the first weeks of return. Classes began in March. That first week, we saw an estimated 1 million students return to the classroom. That's an estimated 20%. Thereafter, as of March 21st, we had 82.4% of primary school students return to the classroom. We're at about 81% as of last week, but the Peruvian government issued a new rule that allows us to go back 100%. Why is that? Because the third wave of COVID has declined and we have higher vaccination rates. Next slide, please. Essentially, we have emphasized biosafety measures in coordination with the Ministry of Health. We have distributed 122 million hygiene kits. This benefits 96% of schools and educational facilities. We've transferred $206 million for maintenance, and again, this has benefited 94% of schools. This includes water, electricity, and some drainage. The infrastructure has virtually collapsed in some areas because it was in disuse for 2 years. We have a 74% deficit in terms of educational infrastructure. So this is one of the major challenges we're up against as a country. What we've done is plan a budget to ensure that we are able to maintain the infrastructure so that students can return to the classroom. Masks. I know that the word for mask is different in many Spanish-speaking countries, but to protect our students and faculty from COVID, we have allocated $106.8 million to distribute 8,001,153,326 masks, as well as different types of facial protection. We began this campaign in March of this year. When it comes to our teachers, as part of the return to the classroom, we have turned to our teachers. We have updated school curricula. Because of socioeconomic reasons, the pandemic has had an impact on family budgets. We've seen some who used to be in private schools migrating over to public schools. So we also have new migrants who are joining the school system. Peru is about 32 million inhabitants. That's our population. It's as if we added 2 new regions with the number of migrants that we have. Pre-pandemic, they had access to schools, and now post-pandemic, we are trying to ensure access to education because we believe in children's right to an education. That's why we're seeing an increase in need for teachers. There are also more school directors and principals as well as aides. Vaccinations. This is extremely important. For us, this has been the key indicator for return to the classroom. 95.5% of our faculty and assistants have had 2 shots. 71.2 with 2 vaccinations plus the booster. As far as students are concerned, this remains a challenge for us. We are trying to increase vaccination rates. It's sometimes a challenge to raise awareness amongst the parents. There's certain reluctance by parents to have their children vaccinated. So we have to do more work to raise awareness amongst the population. Our adult vaccination rate is quite high, and that is helpful. Right now, the Peruvian government has approved the next booster. This is specifically for older adults and healthcare workers, but we're hoping to extend that to the broader population. Distribution of educational materials. One of the pillars in terms of progress that Peru has made in educational achievement has been through the distribution of educational materials. We have 20,294,908 in deliveries of workbooks. This is a major achievement for us. With 41 native languages, and we have workbooks in these languages to ensure intercultural education. We have turned over these workbooks to the education centers, and 89% of these have been dispatched. And if you'll recall, these are month-by-month measurements. we had 68.2% of materials delivered. By the end of the month, we will be providing a report with more up-to-date data. As far as other types of materials are concerned, we have reached 52% distribution. In this way, as students return to the school 100%, they will have the materials they need. Next slide, please. As we try to narrow the digital gap, we're moving a bit more slowly. Nationally, this has been a challenge because of the geographic diversity. We do not have full coverage yet. We have turned over tablets, solar chargers. You can see the figures of what has already been delivered, but the distribution is still uneven. Our major challenge is to ensure that there is nationwide connectivity. Again, this is some unfinished business that we are still working on. As far as biosafety conditions are concerned, 67% of educational services, whether public or private, have the biosafety standards in place. We are seeing progress with full ventilation. That's 66%, 67% are able to comply with the standards of social distancing. This is based on the new health guidelines. 61% had the spaces organized in the proper way. We also have signage in these spaces, and 16%, 51% have washing and disinfection areas for hands. Just 11% meet all biosafety conditions. Again, this is a major challenge because we have outdated infrastructure. This is something that we were grappling with before the pandemic. The authorities, we've heard from other authorities who've spoken before me that these continue to be challenges for them as well. As far as maintenance is concerned, you can see some of the measures we've taken. There was an emergency decree on education that emphasized decentralization in learning recovery, as well as accommodations for vulnerable populations, for those with disabilities, for those who speak native languages, and for Afro-descendant communities. We are also looking at the social, emotional side of the return to school. In this vein, we have been implementing programs. The matter of change is something we're focusing on, and we have been working with colleagues from other countries. We've had an exchange with Ecuador, but yes, I'm sorry, I will wrap up. And with that request, I just wanted to close up by saying that these exchanges are very enriching for us so that we are able to share our experiences. We face similar challenges in the need to rethink education, overhaul this, have hybrid spaces available. I will leave you with those thoughts and that information from Peru. Thank you very much.
And we appreciate very much the comprehensive presentation, the insightfulness of what you have done. I think that what we have seen is just how much our member states have done during these last 2 years to overcome a major crisis, unprecedented in nature, and the Herculean efforts that they have made. Interestingly, the languages that they had barriers that they had to overcome, 25 languages in Guatemala, 41 languages in Peru, and the range that we see in terms of numbers, 8 million students in Peru versus 28,000 in St. Vincent. Nevertheless, the governments were faced with trying to pivot and address education continuity in something that they did not see coming. And so we commend all of our member states for the efforts. I don't know, Ambassador, that we have more time. I would now turn it on. I thank the panelists for participating. I hope that we have sufficient lessons learned that we can share between and among member states to foster cooperation on what the changes that have been implemented and how we can help each other prepare for other exogenous shocks. And with that, I will hand it over to our distinguished chair for the dialogue with delegates. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Muchísimas gracias a los distinguidos panelistas.
Thank you to the distinguished panelists for their participation and to our executive secretary for moderating the panel. We are tight in time. This is the first time we're back in person. So we do have to make an effort to adjust to what exists and, of course, to the budget. So I now would like to open the floor to the delegations for comments and remind you that we do need to stick to our agenda and time limits in the agenda. I now call on Costa Rica. Ambassador Solano of Costa Rica has the floor. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank you very much for having convened this meeting to build a path towards creating a new hemispheric educational covenant to address the health crisis. And we'd like to thank the various speakers, the ministers and experts who have spoken today. In particular, I would like to thank you for having convened a meeting in person, which is the first meeting I have attended since I came to the city under the pandemic. Speaking about the pandemic and the challenges of the educational system, Madam Chair, I'd like to share 3 lessons learned that we can highlight from our country. First, we need to protect the most vulnerable in order to close the inequality gaps and rebuild better through a universal digitalized quality education system. We continue to deal with a pandemic that has exacerbated inequalities between countries and between individuals. Those who are most vulnerable are the ones who have suffered the most. Education is a cornerstone to the development and individual freedom, as well as for collective progress. This is why we must ensure that every child, every adolescent has quality education and has all the necessary tools available to allow them to participate in the labor market. In this effort, Costa Rica implemented a hybrid education method to improve education and grant better technical education scholarships with a technical emphasis of the needs in each region of our country. One, for instance, is an agreement signed recently between the multinational corporation Intel and our National Learning Institute, INE, in February, which allows youth to have technical and academic training and at the same time work for that company. I'd also like to note that our school has technical professional schools for quite a few decades now, and they have been the seeds for different areas of jobs in science, technology, accounting, and other important fields that allow these youth to leave school with a job offer in the national market. Secondly, investment and the maintenance of the infrastructure is very important for the educational system in order to ensure that students are retained. We have to continue our effort to continue our capital investment in equipment in schools to have proper facilities for all students. The biggest challenge is to obtain digital equipment and collective access to it and quality content for that equipment. Costa Rica is working on the Bicentenary Network, which provides interconnection for more than 4,000 educational centers so that the best digital tools are made available to everyone in an effort to attain equality of opportunity. Also, it includes digital literacy, both for educators, the teachers, as well as the students. And that is an ongoing challenge for our region. Costa Rica has created educational spaces using alternative platforms such as radio, television, and we have prepared some individual autonomous guides for students who don't have access to electronic means or connectivity, allowing for them to continue their education. The third lesson learned is that the only way we're going to get out of this crisis in all areas is through multilateralism, solidarity, and international cooperation by sharing successful experiences among states, as some of the presenters have already mentioned, is particularly important at this point in time so that if we can move forward in creating a common agenda. Since in the Inter-American Institution on Education, Costa Rica has benefited from the exchange, and we've also provided and made available to countries that are interested success cases of ours, and we have learned from them as well. We have learned things that we can implement in our country. For instance, we have socialized the strategy of Alliance for Bilingualism to train youth in learning a new language. We've also shared with members the results of the program on food, nutrition in school, and adolescence, PANEA, which were activities that we undertook when COVID-19 struck. Education is a commitment that joins us all together. We require urgent and concerted action to create quality opportunities for all students without any distinction. For Costa Rica, this challenge is an opportunity to develop individuals and rebuild better through inclusion and digitalization, by bringing together our nations and working together to achieve this. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ambassador Solana, for your participation. I now call on the delegation of the Bahamas.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, all. Chair, at the outset, my delegation must thank you for convening this meeting, and it's focused on this very important topic of post-pandemic educational recovery and repair. And I want to thank our speakers and our panelists for the experiences shared on educational reform and continuity during and as we look to emerge, hopefully, from the pandemic. While managing and recovering from the health and economic impacts of the pandemic have, of course, been front of minds for our countries and governments over the past 2 or so years, it has perhaps been the toll taken on our youth, who have faced significant disruptions to education and socialization that will be a legacy of the pandemic that will require the most attention in order to unwind. We know that maintaining access to quality and inclusive education through digital and hybrid mechanisms and mitigating lost learning was a particular challenge all of our countries, big and small, faced. The Secretary for Educational Cooperation from Argentina noted the efforts they are making to provide additional time in the classrooms for students to catch up with the lost learning. And this reflects, I believe, the challenging decisions and investments that many of our countries, including mine, have also had to take, even amidst the fiscal constraints imposed by the shocks from the pandemic. Still, as the Honorable Minister from St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the Deputy Minister from Ecuador noted, respectively, the pandemic also provided an opportunity for our countries to rethink how well our curriculums are preparing youth for the digital opportunities of today and tomorrow, and to accelerate transformations in infrastructure and innovations in pedagogy to incorporate more digital and hybrid delivery of education that was both necessary and long overdue. Chair, we also want to thank Executive Secretary Osborne and her team for the support SETI provided to member states with our efforts to bridge the digital divide and adjust how education was being delivered over the course of the pandemic. The Bahamas has been a beneficiary of support through the Pro Futuro project, which provided both hardware and software to bolster the efforts that were underway in our country to deliver digital education. And we know that the Committee on Education and our Department for Human Development and Education also did work on socializing best practices for states to follow as we all navigated uncharted waters during the pandemic. Chair, the Bahamas looks forward to further opportunities for sharing of experiences and best practices in digital education, teacher training, mitigating learning loss, and addressing the lingering psychosocial impacts on both students and teachers. And we also look forward to any opportunities for enhanced cooperation among fellow member states and with partners of SETI on digital transformations and continuity within our education systems. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a la delegación de Bahamas.
I thank the delegation of the Bahamas and call on Ambassador Cortizo of Panama. Thank you, Madam Chair. The delegation of Panama would like to thank you for celebrating this very relevant meeting and the participation of distinguished authorities, and take advantage of the opportunity to express our appreciation to their excellencies Claudia Ruiz Acesola and Curtis King, representing Guatemala and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, respectively. We also take note of the comments made by the distinguished panelists who, through their statements, have clarified the impact of the pandemic and the importance of working towards rebuilding the huge gap that has been created for vulnerable populations in the area of education. For Panama, like the rest of the world, we had to face major challenges in education during the pandemic, with greatest impact in the official schools that were remote. This led the authorities to establish a strategic plan to lay a path towards bringing children back to school in a safe way to when the school year began, and to adjust the educational system to face the future so that we may be able to confront problems such as these in the future. I'd like to highlight the opportunity to adopt an accelerated learning program to help those students who remained without access to education during the pandemic. We've also strengthened connectivity in the schools and in providing technological equipment so as to allow remote access to education for the students with limited resources or in remote areas. Panama recently adopted, and consistent with the 23rd meeting of the Council of Ministers of SICA, Law 456, which establishes the guidelines for implementing and developing public educational policies to bring about digital change in education. The purpose of this new law is to develop public educational policies to increase equality and equity in the schooling system by setting up different learning models, including flexible educational models through technological change. This technological and digital change empowers the educational system with systems such as energy, connectivity, devices, content, and support platforms for students. The structure will be virtually supported 100% in-person classes or remotely. The project also supports education STEM and technical support to all students on a progressive basis, leading to the development of curricula according to the skills required for the 21st century. But in addition to this structure, through this law, a national basic services plan has been adopted. We have an evaluation, monitoring, follow-up, and implementation process for the purpose of innovating the training of teachers. In this way, and together with strategic partners, such as various international organizations who have helped us in this area during the challenges we're still facing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, this also reaffirms our commitment to our children and to the need to continue breaking those inequality gaps that have become very deep. Thank you very much. The delegation of Panama, and call on Brazil. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First of all, Brazil would like to join those others who have spoken and played an important role during the pandemic. Those who have, I would like to extend to those who lost loved ones during the pandemic my condolences. The educational policy that were implemented has led us to realizing what are the best needs. The pandemic aggravated social, economic, and emotional problems. Thus, students, families, and teachers have felt this, not only over the short term, but over the long term. Madam Chair, I'd like to underscore the federal nature of Brazil's educational system and the constitutional principle of universal autonomy. This federal belief allows us to coordinate with other institutions. The Ministry of Education has developed a policy to restore education post-pandemic. We have a platform for developing training, and we'd like to ask others who have suffered the same, what they have used, what they have done, because we would like to cooperate with them. Our Brazilian platform is available to all public and private schools in the country. This platform allows us to diagnose and place the students thanks to a partnership that has been developed with the Ministry of Education for this platform. The assessment, the evaluation of the platform does not require that the students reflect only what they've learned in the classroom, but also what they've learned on their own, through their own growth, through other means. This allows the teacher to provide personalized education for that student and find out which are those students who need additional support. Thus, the teachers and the principals can interpret the results and then provide the necessary teaching materials for that particular student and provide teleschooling through computers. We have 14,000 school directors who have participated, 9,280 teachers, and 174,000 teachers on the platform. We have done many individual evaluations. Now, the platform focuses on the assessment of primary school, but of course it does not replace full schooling. Each tool provides different results in order to assess the Brazilian school system. This initiative is linked to the Ministry of Education as well. That way, schools can print the educational material, download it from the ministry, and use it for the students. The idea is to improve teaching and a personalized education in learning. Brazil is hoping through this to be able to provide education for all. Thank you, Orimar, for your participation, and I now call on El Salvador, who's in the room. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank the authorities for their presentations, which has allowed them to develop synergy for working together to improve education in the region. Madam Chair, in compliance with the national standards of our country, which define education as a fundamental right inherent to a human being, and for which the state has the obligation and purpose of conserving it and disseminating it, one of the main objectives of the government of President Bukele has been to tangibly push quality education as one of the essential pillars for the comprehensive development of our country. The impact of capacity to ensure continuity in education. We therefore were able to adapt successfully during this crisis. In that context, we developed the continuing education plan as a pedagogic strategy developed by the specialists in the Ministry of Education, Science, and Technology. To date, 4 phases have been implemented under the slogan Education Continues, which aims to improve education, starting in the home and then bringing the kids gradually back to the classroom through these hybrid modalities, multimodal and optional modalities. There has been a required vaccination of all teachers in the public and private sector. We recognize that during this crisis, a new paradigm for learning has developed in our country. And it is for this reason that in order to decrease the digital divide, we have trained about 30,000 teachers in the public sector in the use of technology for teaching. We also have distributed to teachers and more than 1 million students at the national level portable computers and tablets with their corresponding educational platforms for the learning of English and for free connection to internet. In a parallel basis, we have developed a school infrastructure plan where we will be improving installations of 766 educational centers and benefit 199,230 students and 3,064 classrooms throughout the country. The program called My New School aims to build 640 schools over a 3-year period, which will have hexagonal classrooms that allow for an environment that is better for learning and breaks the traditional design of a rectangular classroom, which has required the largest public investment in the history of our country in education, both for infrastructure and in providing these social digital connection programs, which will give access to internet and technology to 2,200 public institutions at the national level. This effort has been done together with the Ministry of Health, the Secretariat on Innovation, the Ministry of Public Health, and the Ministry for Local Development, which means that to date, El Salvador is the only country in the region that has eliminated the mandatory use of masks in the in-person classroom. And the plan, Joy to Going Back to School, has now been certified by the Pan American Health Organization. Madam Chair, El Salvador values this opportunity for inter-American dialogue, which allows us to identify, implement, and develop initiatives with aggregate value to break paradigms and strengthen the capacities member states have to ensure quality education for all the population, particularly for vulnerable groups within our region. Thank you very much. I thank the delegation of El Salvador and call now on Paraguay. Thank you, Madam Chair. The delegation of Paraguay would like to thank you for having included this item towards the development and new hemispheric pact and express our appreciation and thanks to the authorities for their presentations. 2 years after the pandemic, during which the educational system worldwide, as well as other sectors, suffered crises. And the sectors with the least resources were the most affected. They had to adapt in a creative way to replace in-person education through technology. In Paraguay, several factors have been noted for reactivating the educational system and the return to in-person classes through the establishment of the protocol for a safe return to in-person classes in 2022, so as to ensure that educational institutions continue to be safe and healthy places to learn. These spaces adapted as the epidemiology improved in the country. In terms of digital matters, we have developed programs to train teachers in digital content and digital devices in order to improve the technology skills of educators. We have taken note of the principles proposed by the Secretariat of the OECD and International Education Institution for having effective educational and achieve better levels of recovery. We highlight the reference to providing the amount to provide support for the social and emotional needs of the students and for the training of educators to help the students in these social emotional needs. Madam Chair, in addition to providing safe space and improving technology, there's one very important factor, emotion. In the Ministry of Education and Science in Paraguay, the National Institute for Educational Assessment implements a system for evaluating the quality of education and covers several components: the learning of students, the performance of the teachers, and the comprehensive integration of the education, so that the outcome of this result provides input for making informed decisions. One of the latest acceptance was the socio-emotional skills during the pandemic in the lower and higher grades. And we found the following: that we needed to identify and establish mechanisms to provide adequate support to students who have low self-esteem, irregular well-being, and vulnerability. In the Paraguayan sample, we have identified that 30% of the 3,159 students in the 17 departments of the country during the period of May to September of 2021 were facing these problems. So one of the major challenges will be to develop a comprehensive view for developing the social and emotional skills of the students, including the family environment, as we close the gaps to address the more vulnerable sectors and improve our technology. And finally, I'd like to indicate my country's commitment to contribute to the strategies of the region that will allow us to bring about an educational transformation, ensuring quality, timely, and relevant education. Thank you very much. Thank you, Carolina, for your statement. I now call on the Ambassador Carlos Raimunde of Argentina. Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Ambassador Maria Rocaber. First of all, I'd like to thank Minister Ruiz Casasola and the Minister of Education of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Mr. Curtis King, for their presentations. And I'd like to congratulate the panelists, particularly a dear colleague and member of the staff. The sound is being cut off, so I didn't hear what he just said. So my particular greetings to her. Second, I'd like to ratify our commitment to the Inter-American Committee on Education with the chair of Ecuador and the Department of Human Development and Employment of the organization for having prepared the 11th meeting of Ministers of Education, which is to take place in May, and for moving towards the second phase of the Inter-American Educational Agenda 2022-27 that was adopted at the ministerial meeting in Panama in 2015. I would like to conclude with the following, Madam Chair. By ratifying an idea that has already been expressed by my country, which is based on the historic experience of our countries. We have suffered and continue to suffer from exclusion and a lot of inequality, to which I personally can add militant because it began in high school and in university. Back then, there was a very hot debate going on between excellence and mass education. Some thought that these are two contradictory concepts. But for us, I don't think there's a contradiction. For us, I think inclusion is the first step towards excellence. Because we are international, when more developed countries impose their standards and we try to meet them, we find that in societies such as ours, where there's so much inequality, so much social imbalance, those models don't apply to us. Sometimes these models are tested in a lab, but we end up finding that there's all sorts of problems with them, which means that a lot of students drop out from the educational system, either because of poverty or other social scourges. So what I'd like to say is that mass education and excellence are not contradictory concepts. Rather, I think inclusion, the fact that everyone, all educators, the teachers, and the students are included in the system is a pre-requirement in order to attain excellence for everyone.
Fernando, do you think we can get Ambassador Raimundi back on the screen? I believe that he had just finished his comments. Thank you, Ambassador Raimundi, for your participation. I now offer the floor to the delegate from Canada.
Distinguished ministers and panelists for their insightful presentations, Secretary Osborne and her team for their invaluable work on these issues, and finally, a very good morning to all of the ambassadors and delegates who are here in the Hall of the Americas this morning, as well as online. Canada's education system is under the authority of each of our provinces. And so while we do not have a centralized Ministry of Education, we wanted to contribute to the discussion, particularly two of the questions that were put forward by the chair for reflection at this meeting. The first question asks us to take as context the educational pacts that exist at national and global level, and you have asked us to reflect on what the main challenges and opportunities are that we see ahead. Canada would say that global experiences underline the great opportunity to prioritize the inclusion, wellness, and protection of the most marginalized learners within our national education systems as we build back better. Girls, children with disabilities, Indigenous and minority groups, refugees, migrant, and other forcibly displaced children and youth. We can achieve this through developing more inclusive policies and legal frameworks, strengthened by national accountability mechanisms, building national and local capacity for disaster risk reduction, resilience, and emergency preparedness. A lesson from Canada's Global Learning Campaign is to actively engage youth, teachers, and learners to develop solutions for a more inclusive, safe, and healthy school environment. We find that it is often helpful to ask those that are affected by the situations to contribute to the solutions. An important challenge we face as we increasingly adopt digital learning tools is to close the digital divide. And of course, this echoes the comments that were made by the Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and many of us around the table this morning. Digital learning infrastructure developments should be guided by the Global Declaration on Connectivity for Education, including digital solutions that ensure the full and equal participation of all learners, avoiding over-reliance on single technology solutions, and closing gendered, socioeconomic, and territorial gaps. We were also asked what role the facilitation of policy dialogue and consensus building plays in the sustainability of this type of work. And Canada would say that regional and global education forums, such as this council, the Global SDG 4 Steering Committee, last month's Together for Learning Summit, and the upcoming UNSG Transforming Education Summit are essential spaces to come together to agree on collective action to build more resilient and inclusive education systems. They allow us to share best practices as we are today and collaborate on regional and global frameworks such as integrated digital learning platforms or learning passports for children on the move. This promotes greater coordination, accountability, and more sustained efforts in a context of competing national priorities in the pandemic recovery efforts. Thank you, Chair.
Muchas gracias, Alexandra. Ofrezco la...
Thank you, Alexandra. I now offer the floor to the delegation of Mexico. Thank you, Madam Chair. My delegation would like to thank the presenters, the Minister of Education of Guatemala and the Minister of Education of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as well as the distinguished panelists for discussing this topic in CIDI. It is important to have information and data on something so important in the region, that is the return to a new normal in the context of the pandemic, particularly in our education systems, in a way that acknowledges the very difficult and painful experiences, particularly for vulnerable children, as they have been the most affected. My delegation would like to make the most of this opportunity to share some of Mexico's experiences that were undertaken to address the need to continue on with education in the context of the pandemic, as well as to return to the classroom in a safe and inclusive way. In March 2020, the Secretariat of Public Education implemented a strategy, Learn at Home, through which we sought continuation of learning for approximately 25 million students who are in primary education in Mexico. This was a multi-platform approach through TV, radio, websites, and the direct delivery of educational packages. In March, there were 1,000 television programs produced, some in indigenous languages, and some didactic material shared with children. The coverage was 94% of our student body in Mexico. At this time, the Aprende en Casa, Learn at Home, had received more than 70 million visits. In June of 2021, the Secretariat for Public Education and the Secretariat of Health of Mexico, with the support of both national and international organizations, published a reorientation guide for the reopening of schools. This is a fundamental document upon which the measures and principles for pursuing reopening strategies for children and adolescents during the pandemic were based. In this period, we have been able to see children return to the classroom in a safe and inclusive way. This guide includes, as one of its pillars, a series of measures for the return of students that were designed based on participatory dialogue with teachers, principals, parents, and students from different regions and contexts. This participatory dialogue identified the need as a priority to address children's and adolescents' physical and mental health. So the Secretariat of Health and Secretariat of Public Education implemented a training program online via a platform called Mexico X that was aimed at teachers and parents, helping them to develop the tools that they need to address the needs of children and adolescents who are experiencing some sort of psycho-emotional difficulties. With our Safe Return to Classes campaign, Both secretariats established a program. This is based on an epidemiological stoplight. The idea is to provide guidance to teachers and parents, eliminate discrimination, address matters of ethnic origin, discrimination, or migratory status. Thanks to the measures taken by the two secretariats, as of now, approximately 32 million students, 1,900,000 teachers have returned to the schools in more than 22,000 educational institutes. The priority is to resume education processes and to address and attend to the physical and mental health of both the students and teachers and families. Thank you very much. I now offer the floor to the delegation of Chile. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I welcome the return to in-person meetings in Chile. And Chile would like to refer to something that is unfortunately recurrent in return to school. We've seen school violence based on some social conflicts. Madam Chair, after being out of the classroom for nearly 2 years and with practically total virtual relations, the return to the classroom have increased the challenges entailed in coming back together physically. For this to be inclusive, for it to be respectful, we must create forums for dialogue as the basis for both the teaching and learning process. That is why we are very grateful to CD for allowing us to reflect on what is occurring region-wide. The violence we're seeing in schools, or the upsetting of the status quo, means that we have to address these outbreaks of violence and ensure a safe return to school. People have to learn to act with empathy in educational centers and schools, because this is part and parcel of the return to in-person learning. This is where everyone's health and ability to live and work together is essential, without any discrimination or biases, so that everyone is ensured a life free from violence. That is why we have to humanize education. In other words, to put at the center of education the recognition of everyone else. This must be person-centered. We complement this with the framework for inclusive education, which maintains that we are all diverse in terms of our beliefs, our cultures, ideologies, gender expression. Nevertheless, on our own, we cannot necessarily understand the differences between us and others. For that, we need very intentional and targeted processes to understand the differences that exist in educational spaces and that influence learning. Madam Chair, thank you very much. Thank you, Felipe, for your words. I now give the floor to the delegation of the United States.
Madam Executive Secretary, ministers, ambassadors, and other distinguished delegates, it is a pleasure to participate in person in today's meeting, which is focused on a topic that is so timely and so relevant for the societies and economies of all member states. It is notable that most countries in the region, and indeed throughout the world, have experienced so many of the same challenges. It is likewise interesting and reaffirming to hear, as we all move forward into post-vaccination phase of the pandemic, that we share so many of the same priorities moving forward. In the U.S. context, there have been a variety of challenges. I should note first, as Canada also indicated with its system, that the U.S. education system is highly decentralized, where state governments have primary responsibility for education at all levels. And where only about 10% of education funding comes from the federal government, depending on the state. Nevertheless, the U.S. Department of Education plays a vital role in focusing national attention on education policy priorities, data collection, supporting education research, and providing supplemental funding that supports educational excellence and equal access. During COVID, a key challenge in the U.S. context has been trying to balance public health concerns by ensuring that students, parents, teachers, and communities remain safe while mitigating learning loss, especially for marginalized students, and mitigating socio-emotional harm to students from being out of school. In order to respond to these and other challenges, U.S. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona outlined his vision for education priorities in January of this year. Based on the interventions of other delegates, it is clear that we share many of the same priorities for education policy as we seek to respond to the challenges presented and indeed exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. Madam Chair, I would like to highlight today some of the U.S. government's key priorities in education, and the following points simultaneously describe some of the key challenges we face in U.S. education. First, reopening schools and keeping them open, while critical, is insufficient. As other delegations have noted, our hardest and most important work lies ahead of us. As educators and leaders, we are either closing educational opportunity gaps or making them worse, with decisions that we will make in the coming months and years. Secretary Cardona has noted, this is our moment, not only to keep schools open, but to address the inequities that have existed in our school systems for far too long. It is our time to finally make education the great equalizer and the force that can help every student thrive, no matter their background, where they live, their circumstances, or the language they speak at home. Number two, socio-emotional health. Our schools must offer increased access to mental health supports for students. Meaningful and authentic parent and family engagement and interventions for those students who felt the impact of the pandemic more bluntly than others. Schools must also embed mental health supports in their day-to-day operations in new and innovative ways. Every child must have access to a mental health professional, whether through the school or through a community-based organization. On a related note, the United States is working to ensure that all schools can be hubs of their communities, where students and families are connected to the resources and services they need, because, as other delegations have noted, if a child is hungry, lacks stable housing, or lives in unhealthy conditions, their capacity to learn will be diminished. Third, opportunity and achievement gaps. Our Secretary has rightly emphasized that we must address the opportunity and achievement gaps that are pervasive in the United States. He has noted that many of the students who have been most underserved during the pandemic are the same students who have had to deal with barriers to high-quality education well before COVID-19. One specific approach that Secretary Cardona has highlighted is high-quality tutoring. He has noted that across U.S. history, access to high-quality tutoring has long been an opportunity only for the privileged. And this has contributed to opportunity gaps that lead to achievement gaps. Far too many students, especially those who have been historically marginalized, are left without the resources and supports that they need. In the interest of time, I'll just briefly list some of the other priorities that have been cited. Teachers, that we should not just talk about honoring teachers, but make sure they are treated with the respect and the dignity they deserve. Career pathways, we must transform education beyond secondary school so that it leads to well-paying, rewarding careers for all. It should never be too late for our citizens to go back to school, to upskill or to reskill. Madam Chair, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to share a few words about the U.S. perspective and thank other delegates for their valuable contributions on this important topic. The United States looks forward to continued engagement with member states and with the OAS as we seek to jointly address education-related challenges in the region. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a la delegación de Estados.
Thank you to the delegation of the United States. I now offer the floor to the delegation of Ecuador. Thank you, Madam Chair. We appreciate the inclusion of this important item on the agenda. I would like to thank the Minister of Guatemala and the Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines for their interventions, as well as the presentations by the invited guests. My delegation has been working on behalf of children and adolescents and each of their teachers so that they can engage in educational activities in an environment that lends itself to recovery. I would like to highlight what is being done by SETI to support the region, and I restate our commitment as Vice Chair of the committee. Thank you very much to the delegation of Ecuador. And lastly, I offer the floor to the Dominican Republic online, Rafael Bello. Do we have him online, Fernando? Yes, he is coming online. Ambassador? Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning to the distinguished delegates, Kim Osborne, Marty Carmen Plata, Secretary of the SETI, and panelists. The permanent mission of the Dominican Republic just wanted to briefly thank the chair for considering education in the framework of this committee, to the national education authorities for sharing those very rich experiences today. We also would like to extend our thanks to the members of the panel for your explanations. Madam Chair, we would like to take this opportunity to introduce Dr. Rafael Bello Diaz, our Vice Minister for Education Quality in the Education Ministry of the Dominican Republic, who will share experiences and lessons learned in Dominican Republic in the post-COVID era. I hope the Vice Minister has been able to join us online. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ambassador. I hope that we have the Vice Minister online. No, Madam Chair. We would like him to refresh his browser and request the floor, and that way we will be able to connect him. Given the time while we are waiting for the Vice Minister connect, Fernando? Yes, I believe we have him here. Given the time while we are resolving this technical glitch, we will move on to our next item, approval of the draft work plan for SETI, which is item 3 on our order of business, the approval of the draft work plan of SETI for 2022, document CD/doc 344/22. The representatives will recall that this document was presented during the SETI meeting on March 22nd, when we reminded you that the delegations would have time to review it and make comments. As far as I've been told, no comments or inputs have been received since then. I offer the floor to the delegates if you have any comments on the draft work plan. Seeing no request for the floor on this point, this was distributed in due time to the delegations. Having received no comments thereon, I propose that we approve the draft work plan for SETI for 2022 as it stands in document CD/doc 344/22. There being no objections, it is hereby approved. Do we have the Vice Minister with us yet? No, unfortunately not yet. Okay, then let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is consideration and approval of the preliminary draft annotated agenda of the provisional list of observers and special guests to the 5th meeting of Ministers and High Authorities of Social Development, REMPES, which will be held in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic in November of this year. To present the documents for this, I am pleased to offer the floor to the Executive Secretariat for Rights and Equity of the OAS, Marty Carmen Plata. Marty Carmen Plata, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair, and my greetings to Ambassador and to my colleague Kim Osborne. First, I wanted to thank you for the ability to participate this morning to talk about some of the advances we've made in the preparation for this ministerial process. On behalf of the authorities of CIDES, the draft documents define the central aspects of the upcoming meeting for social development. As Technical Secretariat, on February 22nd, during the regular meeting of CIDE, they approved the offer to convene the 5th meeting of Ministers of High-Level Authorities of Social Development to be held in November in the Dominican Republic. This led to the launching of the process for preparing the ministerial through many virtual meetings held by those in charge of the process, Mexico, Paraguay, and Guatemala, and the Troika of these 3 countries, plus the Dominican Republic, as well as with the leadership of the working groups, including Mexico, Canada, the Dominican Republic, and Costa Rica. I wanted to highlight the fact that thanks to their leadership and work, we have been able to move forward in putting together the ministerial mandates and to hold these meetings as we have over the past 6 years. The calendar stipulated 2 key meetings in the months of March and April. On the one hand, we proposed holding the 15 regular meeting which was held on March 22nd, 2022, where the member states were able to analyze progress and implementation of the ministerial mandates, where the CIDES authorities proposed topics for the next Rendes. So we have a declaration of priorities in social development and a preliminary draft agenda. The meeting was very successful and had the active presentation of 24 member states, each one fully committed to review the documents that were presented and provide feedback to ensure a duly participatory process. The second meeting is today, and so I would ask my colleagues to please put the presentation on the screen, if you will. Yes, well, we'll just keep going. As we committed in the calendar approved for the ministerial process. Next slide, please. At today's meeting, we're presenting through the Technical Secretariat the preliminary drafts of the agenda, which based on the rules of procedure, the delegations must comment on. Next slide, please. The preliminary draft topic and the provisional list of observers and special guests. As you can see, these were distributed to the member states by the Technical Secretariat. I wanted to highlight that based on time constraints, I am not going to go into detail about the topics, but I will highlight some of the most salient points. Besides taking in initial comments and any comments today, the member states will have 30 calendar days to carefully review each document and to provide in writing their observations. Thereafter, in the regular CD meeting on May 31st, we hope to be able to approve the draft documents. And on July 28th, there will be a preparatory meeting for the 5th ministerial. First, I would like to show the preliminary agenda. As we mentioned in our recent meeting, we had the approval of draft topic, which brought in the inputs made by the states, and now we have the draft agenda. The proposed theme is strengthening hemispheric cooperation to resilient reconstruction and sustainable development in the Americas. And the main topics will be the following. Next, please. Do you want to...
de pandemia por COVID-19, sobre el cual habrá paneles específicos en referencia a protección.
On this, there will be specific panels on adaptation to disasters, environmental sustainability of social systems, technological innovation for educational systems, perspectives on basic universal system, and systems that are adaptable to international migration. Next slide. The next topic proposed is the labor market and social protection, productive labor inclusion, and encouraging formality with emphasis on access to social security as strategies to reduce inequalities and eradication of poverty. In addition, we have proposed for the first time in the area of social development in the OAS, one topic of the most interest and relevance in the public arena in terms of care systems. For this, we have defined the following topic: to move towards care society, challenges and lessons learned from the comprehensive care systems in the region. And finally, highlight the key role the OAS has as a political forum and as a mechanism to promote joint activities to face hemispheric challenges. So we have proposed the strengthening of international and regional cooperation as a key to the promotion of equity and sustainability in these social protection systems. In addition, during the meeting, we will have space allowed for the election of the new authorities of the Inter-American Social Development Commission, CIDES, for the 2022-2025 cycle. We will establish the date and place of the 6th FEMDES, and we'll consider and approve the draft declaration, Inter-American Declaration on Priorities in the Area of Social Development, and the draft Plan of Action of the Dominican Republic 2022, which will be key to establishing ministerial mandates and the continuity of the ministerial process. Next slide, please. The preliminary draft agenda has a technical updated analysis on the regional context and each one of the social problems considered as one of the critical points to attain the global goal of decreasing social gaps. It also includes the results expected from the meeting and a series of questions to guide the ministerial dialogue, as well as matters pertaining to the proper development of the meeting. The annotated agenda also defines the objectives of the meeting, which are to reach agreement to consolidate social protection systems, inclusive and sustainable, to identify and share effective experiences and innovations in public policy for social protection, highlighting challenges and lessons learned, to promote commitments of partnership for hemispheric cooperation as a key mechanism for encouraging social development in the region, and highlight the key role that the ministries of social development have in mitigation of risks, limiting impact and recovery, and therefore the need to strengthen our institutional capacity. We would like to urge member states to carefully look at this substantive document, which will allow us to exchange views and create a consensus so that the meeting can be developed in an effective manner and we can take maximum advantage of the time allowed. We also have defined, next slide please, through the Technical Secretariat of CD, a provisional list of observers and special guests to the 5th REMDES. This document lists those entities that, according to the rules and regulations for sectoral and specialized meetings at the ministerial level of CD, will be formally convened to participate. These are bodies of the Inter-American System, permanent observers and other observers, special guests, and guests of the Dominican Republic as the host country. Having presented the key content of each one of the draft documents, next slide please, we would like to urge member states to participate actively in providing feedback. For this, the countries will have 30 calendar days to send us their documents prior to approval at the next regular session of CD on the 31st of March 2022. I would like to conclude by reminding you that the current crisis and post-crisis situation makes it all the more important than ever before what the OAS does in social development. The dialogues, the meetings of ministers and high authorities of social development are an example of solidarity and cooperation and encouraging technical cooperation that has led to concrete and tangible outcomes in improving the institutional abilities of our countries. We therefore have proposed, together with the Dominican Republic as the host country for the next ministerial meeting, the goal of having historic participation of ministers and high authorities of social development in the region. I therefore would like to avail myself of this opportunity to invite each and every one of you to accompany us during that historic moment of a regional dialogue. You will soon be receiving the official invitation. Finally, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to participate at this distinguished space and remind you that we are at your full disposition to all states to provide any information and support you may need on this topic. Thank you very much. Thank you, Secretary Plata, for your presentation. Let me ask if we still have Vice Minister Bello from the Dominican Republic waiting to enter? No, Madam Chair. Let's therefore ask the Secretariat to share his presentation at the end of the meeting. We won't be able to have the presentation for technical reasons. I'm sorry. But let's try one. He's tried connecting again. Let me try one more time. So as not to make him wait, let's continue with this item and try to conclude with the Vice Minister, Rafael Bello from the Dominican Republic. We lost them again. Those are the things that happen, just like it happens here. And we are benefiting from in person. We have a hybrid system that has allowed us to have high-level authorities be present. But what we need to do is better coordination for the next minute. So if we have a vice minister waiting, we have to give him priority so he doesn't have to wait so long and the signal is lost. But let's try to conclude this so that we can call on the delegations on the REMDES item which is the Dominican Republic as well, and then we can approve the draft agenda. Ambassador Bueno. Thank you, Madam Chair. Our permanent mission would like to thank the Secretariat on Access on Rights and Equality and the members of the Secretariat in the area of social inclusion and SETI and the conference department and all those involved in helping us develop this meeting, working hard with the Office of Coordination of Social Policies in the Dominican Republic so that the 5th meeting of ministers and high authorities for social development is successful and serves as a springboard for the hard work we're going to have to do in social development in all member states of this organization after this pandemic is over. I'd like to thank the efforts made today to present to you the draft preliminary annotated agenda, the draft agenda, and the provisional list of observers and guests so that we can continue with our scheduled calendar and that you make any contributions and feedback in the next 30 days so that we can improve the documents. We'd like to invite each and every one of you to make this 5th Rendes yours, and that we can count on your ministers of social development and your delegations at the Dominican Republic on the 17th and 18th of November next, so that we can all join hard to bringing about social development in the region. Thank you very much, Ambassador Bueno, for your participation on this item under Rendes. Any other delegation participate, intervene on the draft agenda of the 5th Rendes as presented by Secretary Plata? There not being any other delegation that would like to refer to the preliminary draft annotated agenda, nor the preliminary draft agenda for the 5th meeting of ministers and high authorities of social development, I propose that we give the delegations 30 calendar days to review these documents and, if necessary, submit their comments to the Secretariat so that we can approve them at the regular session of CD that will take place next May. If there is no objection, it is so agreed. Agreed. Well, we have now come to the conclusion. We now will look at the provisional list of observers and special guests to the 5th Rendes, document CD/Doc 347/22. Let me remind you that in accordance with Articles 17 and 18 for sectoral ministerial meetings, the provisional list must be authorized by this meeting. I offer the floor to delegations that would like to refer to document CD/Doc 347/22. If there is no request for the floor on the provisional list of observers and special guests to the 5th Rendes as contained in document CD/Doc 347/22, I propose that we approve it and that we instruct the Secretariat to proceed to issuing the corresponding invitations. If there's no objection, the list is approved. Let us move on to the next item of our agenda that refers to the election of the chairman of the Committee on Partnership for Development. As you will recall, the rules of procedure for regular and special meetings of CD establishes in Article 59 that the chairpersons of the standing committees shall be elected each year at the 2nd regular monthly meeting of CD, held immediately following the regular session of the General Assembly. These authorities shall hold office for 1 year or until the election of their successors. In order to comply with these regulations, we had requested nominations beginning last January. However, in spite of many efforts on the part of the chair and the secretariat of the commission, we have not received candidates for this very important position. So since we have not received any candidates to date, and in view of the need to begin the work of the committee, the delegation of Panama would like to submit to the Council for its consideration the candidacy of Ambassador Maria Fernanda Cortizo, the alternate representative of Panama to the OAS, to lead the work of the committee. The commitment of Ambassador Cortizo to the work done by CD and the OAS is well known, and the delegation of Panama is confident that she will be able to carry out the function of chairman of the commission in an efficient and effective manner. I now call on delegations that would like to refer to this candidacy. Well, the applause indicates that she has been elected by everyone, and that we now have a chairman for the committee, because we're in the 4th month and we need somebody to chair the committee for when the negotiations begin. So Ambassador Cortizo has been elected chairman of the Commission on CD.
Bueno, me indican que debemos cerrar el punto que dejamos.
I've been told that we have to close the item we left open. Unfortunately, we couldn't resolve the technical problems in order to be able to have Vice Minister Bello of the Dominican Republic to participate. So since there has been no other request for the floor under this item, I propose that CD take note of the contributions and comments made by the panelists and the guidelines on the creation of a new ministerial hemispheric pact with emphasis on recovery and repair post-pandemic of the educational system, issues that will be considered in detail under the 5th Inter-American Meeting of Ministers of Education that will take place this year. There being no objection, it is so agreed, and I would like to thank the Secretary Kim Osborne and the staff in the Department of Human Development, Education, and Employment for supporting and helping in organizing this meeting. So now let us get back to other matters, since we have concluded all the items on the agenda. I ask if there's any delegation that would like to bring to our attention any other point. There being no other matter to discuss, the meeting is adjourned. The first in-person meeting, and I hope we will resolve the technical problems and adjust as we go along. Thank you.